Welcome to the Universal Spirit Research Lab of Sakimori. Thank you very much for visiting us from among the many channels. We appreciate your kindness. We look forward to working with you. This series, which I will serialize from now on, is about very important facts in Steiner's anthroposophy. However, I am Japanese and I do not understand English. Therefore, I am using AI translation function to create sentences. For this reason, there may be mistakes or incomprehensible parts in grammar or words. I ask for your understanding in advance on this point. In this series, the Steiner Code, Steiner's Prophecies, and Onizaburo Deguchi, we aim to examine in depth two of Rudolf Steiner's prophecies in particular. First, the words, "This Bodhisattva who will come as Maitreya Buddha will also incarnate in this century, not as a Buddha, but in a physical body. He will have the task of giving all humanity the true concepts of the Christ event." This means that the prophecy that Maitreya Bodhisattva was reincarnated in the 20th century, and that we are in an era where we can verify this prophecy. Second, the words, "Christ will return in the first half of the 20th century." This is the prophecy that the Maitreya Bodhisattva of the 20th century will prepare and accomplish the second coming of Christ to the etheric world that indicates the advent of the New Testament. That is, to verify whether the spiritual event that Christ has returned to the spiritual dimension close to the material world has really happened. And when we examine the characteristics of the Maitreya Bodhisattva that Steiner prophesied from various points of view, we find that Onizaburo Deguchi has more points of agreement than any other mystic. The English term Maitreya is written in Japanese as Miroku and pronounced as Miroku. Onizaburo Deguchi was a great spiritualist who was born in Japan 10 years after Steiner was born. He built the Miroku Hall in 1920 and gave lectures on the Miroku world. Furthermore, 3 years after Steiner passed away in 1925, Onizaburo Deguchi held the Miroku Festival and declared the Miroku descent. However, Rudolf Steiner said the following in his lectures on Maitreya Bodhisattva. "I do not want you to trust what I say because I said it, but to check it against history and especially your own experience. In an age of knowledge like today, it is not appropriate to appeal to faith. I would like you to examine my talk through your intellectual reasoning ability. Therefore, I have taken this word seriously and repeated the verification against the history and experience that I have verified in the past, but if I try to explain all the details here, it will become very complex and voluminous. Therefore, in this series, we will try to make the outline as easy to understand as possible and to make it understandable to as many people as possible, so that in the end, you can check it against history and especially your own experience, and examine Steiner's talk. This is the content of this purpose, so I hope you will watch it from the perspective of that possibility might be there or that speculation is doubtful. However, you can deepen your understanding of how Steiner talked about Maitreya Bodhisattva and Christ, so it will not be a waste of time. At the same time, I think you will understand that there are many points of agreement between Onizaburo Deguchi and Steiner's recognition. So, this time, since it is the first episode, I would like to introduce the content of Steiner's prophecy briefly. Rudolf Steiner, in his lectures around 1911, repeatedly spoke about the reincarnation of Maitreya Bodhisattva in the early 20th century. And this Maitreya Bodhisattva, in a past life 100 years before the birth of Jesus, was active as Jeshuben Pandira in the Essene group, preparing for Jesus Christ. Steiner spoke about this as follows. The successor to Gautama Buddha incarnated as Jeshuben Pandira in 100 BC and announced the descent of Christ into the flesh. This being has the task of making people understand the original Christ impulse. This Jeshuben Pandira was under the protection of the Bodhisattva who succeeded Buddha. He prepared Christianity, and the source of the flow that became its tributary can be seen in the Bodhisattva who is the successor to Buddha and will become Maitreya Buddha in the future. And this Maitreya Bodhisattva, who prepared for Jesus Christ, is said to have been stoned to death in anticipation of the mystery of Golgotha 100 years later. And Steiner foresaw that in the 20th century, Maitreya Bodhisattva would reincarnate as a being that announces the appearance of Christ in the etheric world. The result of the etheric appearance of Christ is that humans develop higher powers and come to see Christ, who acts from the spiritual world, with these new powers. And our task is to understand the meaning of the historical struggle of our time and to indicate the meaning of the appearance of Christ in our time, just as Jeshuben Pandira of the Essenes once foresaw the Lion Christ of the House of David. September 10, 1910. Assuming that Jeshuben Pandira, who was stoned to death almost a century before the appearance of Christ in Palestine as the son of Pandira, is reborn in modern times and teaches the appearance of Christ, that Christ must not be the physical Christ, but must appear clothed in ether. Just as he appeared to Paul on the outskirts of Damascus. And we can recognize Jeshuben Pandira, who has been reborn, at this point. But what is important on the other hand is that we learn from the being who will someday become Maitreya Buddha that Christ will appear in our time. That is, to find the existence of the new Essenes. September 10, 1910. In other words, Steiner himself was advocating the need to understand the meaning of Christ's appearance by seeking out Maitreya Bodhisattva and the new Essene where this Bodhisattva is active. Also, here we can see that the historical battle, i.e., the World War, is related to the appearance of Christ in the etheric world. Furthermore, he tells us that we are entering an era where humanity will evolve to be able to see Christ clearly over the next 2,500 years. Clairvoyant consciousness always finds Christ in his etheric body. When humanity evolves in this way, humans will experience the event of Damascus. This ability will appear between 1930 and 1940. If we do not blindly pass this point, we will be able to reach Christ. This is what is called the second coming of Christ in the secret school. A new age is coming, and that age will last for 2,500 years. People will ascend to Christ through anthroposophical views. Christ will come again in the first half of the 20th century. And Christianity will deepen and develop. Furthermore, Steiner also said the following. Even if you die without being able to see the etheric form of Christ, if you understood Christ in the material world, you can see the form of Christ after death. Those who have strayed from spiritual life and did not understand Christ cannot see Christ, and they must wait for the next reincarnation to gain that understanding. Therefore, this is an extremely important theme that opens up the possibility of seeing Christ in the higher spiritual world after death, not only for the anthroposophical society at that time, but also for each of us. Steiner states that this Maitreya Bodhisattva will continue to reincarnate as a guide for humanity on earth, and will become Maitreya Buddha from Bodhisattva in about 3,000 years. About 3,000 years from now, this Bodhisattva will become Maitreya Buddha. He will infuse magical morality into people's hearts from the spiritual world. Such a flow of Maitreya Buddha will cooperate with the Western flow linked to Christian Rosenkreuz. As the true Eastern tradition, which is in line with all mysticism, tells us, Maitreya Buddha, who descended to humanity in a form that can be understood by the human heart and soul over the next 3,000 years, will speak as a mediator of Christ and convey the essence of Christ to humans. It is said in Eastern mysticism that Maitreya Buddha will appear about 3,000 years from now. In that sense, finding the Maitreya Bodhisattva of the 20th century should be an extremely valuable opportunity to acquire teachings that directly connect to the evolution of humanity itself. In the summer of 1921, Friedrich Rittelmeyer, a priest of the Christian Community Religious Renewal Movement founded under the advice of Steiner, is said to have heard the following words from Steiner himself: "If we live another 15 years, we will be able to experience something about the birth of Jeshuben Pandira, a past life of Maitreya Bodhisattva at the beginning of this century." In other words, Steiner had insight into the activities of Maitreya Bodhisattva and foresaw that by around 1936, he would be able to recognize the reincarnated Maitreya Bodhisattva. However, Steiner ascended in 1925, leaving behind such important prophecies. Some people's verification suggests that Steiner himself was speaking the words of Maitreya Bodhisattva and carrying out his work. However, at the time of 1910, when anthroposophists wanted to know who Maitreya Bodhisattva was, Steiner himself said, "It's not me. My individual has nothing to do with Jeshu Ben Pandira, a past life of Maitreya Bodhisattva." This was conveyed by Walter Veggelin, a stenographer of Steiner's lectures. This is recorded in the book Who are Shakyamuni, Canon, and Maitreya, in Japan, but ultimately, even in the present day, 100 years after Steiner's prophecy, no clear evidence to back it up has been presented to us. From now on, the content of this series will rely on such words of Steiner to explore who Maitreya Bodhisattva was and to verify how Christ appeared in the etheric world. As mentioned above, in the first session, we have discussed the prophecies left by Rudolf Steiner about the reincarnation of Maitreya Bodhisattva and the appearance of Christ in the etheric world. In the next session, we plan to cover the circumstances leading up to Steiner's expulsion from the German branch of the Theosophical Society, which he was a member of at the time, due to differences in understanding of the appearance of this Maitreya Bodhisattva and Christ. Thank you very much for watching until the end. We appreciate your continued support.